Finally forced your way in, and then you go. And Rob, with the who's hiring, we'll definitely do the microphones. I'm going to annotate who says they're hiring. I've got a copy of the slide, and I'm just going to say, maybe like next, but I'm just going to say, I'm not taking it directly. I might take this one. I don't want to, you and I have spoken about it. I don't want to call anyone else out. Good idea. Check, level check. No, it's so. I normally wear V-necks. It's really. I'm probably a bit too. It's probably a bit small for me as well.
You want me to run like two?
Yeah.
We did who's hiring up front over here. I can forget
Before the first presentation.
We do a Fred verse. We do it just before pizza.
We used to do that.
So fresh in everybody's hands. We have pizza breakfast.
That's right. It's happening now. I don't know.
Either one.
Good evening. Want another side up?
Get a massive bit of that and push that.
How's your coffee this week? Good?
Yeah, good. Yeah, better than last time.
Good feedback. No, I'm sending that on. It's good. Like all that honest feedback is the best.
You want 3-minute warning?
No, let's do a start now. All right, thanks for coming. It's we don't have to keep the drinks on the back row there if you'd rather sit down. It's up to you. Or all right, so thanks everyone for coming tonight. As Rob noted before, it's week 2 or month 2 of our new schedule, and I've already pushed it back 10 minutes. But thanks for coming. Grab a last slice of pizza, grab a beer. I'm going to talk for about 5 or 6 minutes, I think. Is that good enough, Rob? Yep. Okay. I can hear too much of my own voice, though. I don't like it. So welcome to CocoaHeads. My little speech at the beginning is going to sort of take this this format. Who's this guy? Some upcoming CocoaHeads events. I'm going to talk briefly about our code of conduct, then tonight's agenda, and then who's hiring as well. So I'm Jesse. I'm an iOS developer. I've been around doing iOS in Melbourne the last 7 or so years. I've worked at realestate.com.au, Bean Hunter and RMIT in the past. And I've been sort of running Melbourne CocoaHeads since sort of 2014. So I think if you've been before, you've probably seen me up the front. My goal, I couldn't think of another goal. This was my same goal last month, but I'm still looking to start my own startup. So if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that. Some upcoming CocoaHeads events, not including tonight, because that's where we are. The next event is our new revamped Hack Night. And Hack Night on the 21st of March, which is Wednesday week, is actually going to be joint with the Google developer group as well. So we started talking about that in late last year, and the feedback from the Google group and the feedback from the iOS group from last month was, yep, let's go. So I think we've got 30, 40 people RSVPing for that already, Luke, something like that. That's at AConnX, and that legitimately is a little sit down.
We have capped RSVPs for that too, so if you have RSVPs but you can't come, please take it off so that somebody else can come.
And if you want to come, make sure you RSVP. There's a waiting list. Is that how it works on Meetup? I'm not sure. Yep. We've got a drinks night, which is the sort of casual go to the bar and have a drink. On the 27th, NS Breakfast is the casual opposite of drinks night. It's in the morning and it's breakfast. And then presentation night, we're back here in 5 weeks. MelbourneCocoaHeads.com/about has more detail than it's ever had on all of our events. This is a shot from Hack Night the other week with the Wi-Fi password removed after the fact, after we posted it online. But that's evidence that there was hacking happening at Hack Night. So if you're interested in that, I'm not lying. And double, yeah. Everyone will be cramped. If you're interested in finding out finding CocoaHeads, it's melbournecocoaheads.com. @MelbourneCoco is the Twitter handle. Slack at melbournecocoaheads.com is been going now for a few years. There's 500 odd people in there at the moment, 400. MelbourneCocoaHeads.com/live is the YouTube channel. I've been streaming everything on YouTube the last few years, and I'm slowly getting better at it. And I'm Jesse at melbournecocoaheads.com. Since last month, last month Kate got up and spoke about the code of conduct that we've been working on. Since then, I've published it. And not that I'm into reading big text on screen, but we've put together a pretty comprehensive document on what constitutes a code of conduct for Melbourne CocoaHeads. And it's pretty straightforward, and it makes a lot of sense. There's nothing too crazy in there, but it's just about creating an inclusive environment regardless of everything. If you want to check that out, it's Code of Conduct, melbournecocoaheads.com/code of conduct. If you read through it, or if you feel uncomfortable, or if something sort of happens to you, or you overhear something that you think is not quite right, you can send an email to codeofconduct@melbournecocoaheads.com, and it comes to a group of 3 or 4 of us that are sort of, I guess, working together to do the best we can to sort of help resolve those issues. In addition to code of conduct at the email address, there's also an anonymous form that you can fill out that will just give us enough details. And also, if you'd rather just chat to someone in person, you can always come up and chat to me. Ben down the back has got his hand up to take any queries, and Rob and anyone else you see kind of helping out, they should be able to direct you in the right direction. We've got some sponsors for 2018 that I've been wrangling the last couple of weeks. Wrangling sponsors is fun. Our major sponsor is realestate.com.au. You can see I'm using my connections here. So I'll go through my job history pretty much. But it's great that Real Estate have jumped on to be the major sponsor. And as the major sponsor, they get to come up first in my major sponsor slide, and they can jump up the first in our Who's Hiring section. So it's great that they're on board. And the REA team, who's here from REA? Yeah, there's always a few around. Our silver sponsors, we've got Itty Bitty Apps, people. There's a couple. Oh yeah. Billu from Sydney. Is anyone from Billu here? I think they were going to come down at some stage. J-Tribe, Cognizant, which is the old the Odyssey, and Explore. And is J-Tribe team here? J-Tribe, Cognizant. Fletch isn't here. And from Explore, there's a couple of you guys here. You guys are in the building as well. Yep. Awesome. Awesome. So thanks for putting your hand up. Chris has been my connection there. Thanks for getting all that organised. Our venue this year, and we've confirmed it last month all the way through to the end of the year, which is great. That's a relief. Finding a venue is very hard. Finding a venue that will cater for you every month is hard as well. So that's great that YBF Ventures are on board. Tonight's agenda, perfect timing. We've got Gerald and Israel coming up first, and then Pablo after that. We've got a pretty light schedule tonight, as in we won't be running super late. So to the speakers, you've got enough time. There's no need to rush. Some weeks we need to rush because I don't organise it correctly, but tonight it's all right. We're going to jump into who's hiring. Now, who's hiring, I'm going to annotate who says they're hiring, write it down, and put it in our Slack channel. I was going to say /jobs, but #jobs. And then you can follow up with anyone that's spoken, but also in the breaks, grab the people who say they're hiring and go up to them. They're here looking for people. They're here to chat. So I'll start with just a raise of hands for who's looking to hire at the moment. Miles, did you want to jump in for REA as well? Awesome. Yep. Thanks, Miles.
Hello, everyone. I'm from NAB, National Australia Bank.
And what's your name?
And I'm still looking for another senior iOS developer, and I'm happy to say we're also looking for a non-senior iOS developer.
Awesome. We'll keep going down the back there. Back, around the back, towards the front. Johnny.
Hi, my name's Johnny. I'm doing some work at RMIT. RMIT is offering some short courses. They're always looking for mentors. So if you have any aspirations to be a mentor for short courses, please let me know. There's also some opportunity to do some video sessions for these short courses. That's in the afternoons, a couple of hours, and we'll be able to give you expertise to new Swift learners. So if you're interested, please come talk to me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Johnny. All right. Awesome. So I'll grab everyone's details and I'll chuck them in the jobs channel. That's great. So one more thing. I've still got some CocoaHeads stickers from last month. So if you'd like some CocoaHead stickers, they went like crazy. I held a few. I didn't forget. I just held on to a few. So come and grab a sticker or 3. And that's a photo. Someone was happy with them last month. So I'll get out of the way, and I'll invite Gerald and Israel up. We'll just... No. I think it was, I don't have the date etched in my mind, but it was February last year that we had Playgrounds, so it's kind of 12-month anniversary.
Are you giving them permission to say that the may be called Whistler this year?
Whistler.
Instead of Melbourne.
It needs.
You can't get much further away.
You start getting to Whistler and you start coming back. Yeah.
There are direct Sydney, Seattle, Sydney, Vancouver flights. So.
Okay. Oh well, let's all get our act together and go to Whistler. All right, I'll get out of the way. We'll just set up a laptop for a minute. So if you want to grab another quick drink or go to the bathroom, we'll be back in like 10 seconds. Thanks. Just chuck that on. That'll sit perfectly there. Yep.
Okay.
It's normally pretty good at picking up the sound. And yeah, I keep getting told to hold this closer to my mouth, and you can see me just like not pay attention to that. But it's not too busy, so voice travels. But try and keep it up.
Okay.
I'll shout at you if I can't hear you. And that is unmuted. If you want to just give that a flick and see. Yep, perfect.
No, great. Didn't even have to set up my phone. Sounds good.
Perfect. There you go.
So I'm gonna use both of these.
That's for the recording.
Oh, got it.
That's
Got
just
it.
so they can
Okay.
hear you in here.
All
So
right.
Don't worry about that one.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, why did it drop out? Okay, be careful not to touch the bottom two, because it'll drop out.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. If I could have your attention. Hi, my name is Israel. I'm from Redbubble. I moved to Melbourne about 5 months ago from San Francisco. I'm a product designer. I'm going to be talking about how we implemented favorites and the animation process. And I'm going to hand it over to Gerald for how we actually built it, which is the important part you're all here to see. Previously, before I was at Redbubble, short bio, I've been designing on iOS for about 9 years. Came here from Crunchyroll. My first gig was working at LastPass, so if you've ever used that, I'm sorry, because that was my first gig as a designer. So why even bother use animation? We all hate implementing it. It's really hard. Animation drives user engagement. I think you can see that across a lot of apps. in recent years, motion design has become ever increasingly popular. And although iOS is definitely a trend-driven sort of design space, app space, I do think it has a lot of value. Again, another reason is affordances. Animations can draw users' eyes. It leads to teachable moments without having to do this really staid onboarding experience. You can do a lot with simple animations that teach your users how the app works without having to put up a wall of text. Call and response. What this is, it's a pretty familiar concept to anybody who writes music. You give the call, the user gives the response. Again, this goes into doing a tutorial and tricking your user into going through a tutorial without actually having to do one. User perception. This is something a little overlooked, but animations can add that little bit of polish to your app that makes it look finished, makes it look high fidelity, and makes it look like you give a shit. And then I've been told this is how an Australian would say it. I'm not going to attempt to do the accent up here and get run off the stage, but the last reason to do it is it's cool, right? It gives you a little cool factor to that. So how do we start? From a product design perspective, we want to, of course, achieve parity with some of our competitors, so we do some competitive research. Some designers do this, some don't. I looked into how difficult it would be to actually implement this fancy design that I want. I look at all the areas of the app that I'm planning on implementing this design or animation in. If it's on a really complex screen, or if there's other concurrent animations, is it going to conflict with them? Looking at middleware solutions or libraries like Anime or Lottie or BodyMovin, which got renamed to Lottie. Try and make Gerald's life a little easier. Then performance considerations. Depending on the app, you may drop support for older devices sooner rather than later. We're an e-commerce site, so we basically go back as far as we can. So I have to make sure that what I'm going to do is going to work on these lower spec devices. We're supporting all the way back to, I believe, 5S's right now. And then accessibility. Accessibility is the last one, but maybe I should have put it first. I think as designers, we tend to think about this last, and maybe as developers too. But there are a lot of people who have either sight impairments or like bump up the size of the text or use voiceover. So we should make sure that these animations aren't hard-coded or canned, that they're going to play over other elements, or they're going to scrub voiceover. So the basic process of how I do this, I start with paper prototyping. That's a really fancy way of saying I draw doodles of what the keyframes are. Sanity checks are going around to, let's say, people in finance or people who aren't developers or intimately associated with our space, and make sure that what I want to implement even makes sense to them. Lo-fi animation. By lo-fi, I mean it's really simple. I'm probably just doing simple scaling or rotation effects or something that's really, really easy to do in HTML5. You can use CodePen for this, as well as GUI environments like Hype, even like Flash. Framer is also a really quick way to stand up animations, drop a static ping, and drop the dynamic element you want. If you can write CSS, you can create a prototype. And then for this, because I knew I would have a developer that I could pair with in a couple days, I did a really hi-fi animation. You kind of see this process here. In After Effects, this allows me to create something down to having it frame perfect. And then, so this is a pretty simple breakdown of a concurrent one. I think everybody has used Twitter. This is obviously the inspiration for our animation. This right here is it broken down. This is not Twitter, but this is a very similar animation into 3 parts. And I'm going to talk really quickly about the 3 parts. The halo is an affordance for, obviously we're designing a nice animation, but your finger covers up a lot of it if you're interacting with it. So that expands past people's fingertips, shows you touched an element. We also decided to add haptic feedback as part of that affordance. The particles, again, are about seeing an effect going on your finger, which means instead of resting your finger on the screen, you might move it away. And then, so this is sort of the combined effect of what that looks like. And then really quickly, I'd like to go into some examples of things that are pretty, but that we shouldn't do as designers or developers. So first one up, the problem with this one, it looks great, but the animation goes on too long. The second one, toggling the animation. You don't want to untoggle things with a completely disparate design style. It's going to really confuse the user. The third one, you don't want to repeat glyphs as part of an animation or spawn them elsewhere on the screen. It's kind of confusing to repeat the same shape for one action. And the fourth one, kind of a material design style. It does look really, really nice, but unfortunately, it kind of disconnects the action from the user's input. It provides too much time for the user to feel like the app is contacting some server somewhere. It makes your app feel laggy, even if you have a great animation like that. So for the implementation part, I'm going to turn it over to Gerald right now. Gerald, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Gerald. I need that mic. All right. Cool. Hopefully that works. Gerald, iOS developer at Redbubble. So I'm pretty new. I think I'm only a month in now. But I got a chance to work on cool animations that month. So I'll have a chat about that. So I guess just the basic building blocks of the animation. So I'll be talking a little bit about CA animation and some of the, I guess there's two basic parts of CA animation. CA basic animation, which is kind of your, I'm going from here to here kind of thing. CA keyframe animation. So this is like if you have a little bit more than just a simple from to, you can set multiple waypoints. So that's good for that. Also CA emitter layer. CA emitter layer. So this is kind of a special type of CA layer, and it basically just randomly generates particles. And then finally, the UI view animations that we all know and love, like UI view animate, stuff. We'll be using a little bit of that, but let's take a look at how this is done. Cool. So I've made a little playground that kind of shows off the animation. So you can see right here, there's a button that I've just stuck in the middle of the screen. Can everyone see that? Yep. And so when I tap it, it goes boom, like that. I'll show that just one more time, like that. Cool. So since it's a button, it implemented kind of like when you press down on it, it kind of grows a little bit and then pops into its state. That's the unselected state here. And so all that is just scaling it up to 130%, and then if you're unfavoring it, just popping it to the new thing. But if you're favoring it, then we have like a little celebration that goes on. So that's done here. So if you touch up, then let's favorite animate. So let's go into how we do that. So first of all, we chose to draw the heart shape so that was thinking like, oh, I could do it with an image and blow it up, but was thinking like, oh, if we're scaling it a whole bunch and stuff, then I don't want to see like artifacts. So I thought, oh, I'll just try drawing it. So I did that with a CA shape layer.
Hey, Joe, can you make the text a bit bigger?
Oh. How's that? Cool. Wow, that's big. All right. All right. We'll go over this. So this is just the CA shape layer. So this is just drawing the shape, and it's pretty easy. Like you just set bounds where the position is. I'm choosing to fill it with a color red. This is like Redbubble red. And then I have a method here called draw filled heart. So this is an interesting function in where, here we go, draw filled heart. So it's making UI Bezier path, and I did cheat a little bit here. I use an app called Paint Code. I'll show you that real quick. Oh, that is really small. Well, you can kind of get an idea. It's actually really cool. You can copy paste shapes and stuff from Sketch. So I actually took a Sketch file that Israel handed me and just pasted it in, and it just makes code on how to draw it. And I just basically just copy paste this code into Xcode. So that's pretty much what that is. And yeah, and then for the circle shape, it's kind of the same thing, just using a CA shape layer. So I'm drawing a circle with a stroke and a color. As you can see that right there. And an interesting thing is, so for the initial state of the circle, I want to scale it to be like a little dot in the middle of the heart. And then I'm going to be growing that dot as part of the animation. And so that's right here. So this using a CA keyframe animation, and then I'm just doing applying transform to it. And well, this is a bit hard to see, but maybe I can do that for now. So I'm blowing it up to right here. So there's 3 steps in the keyframe. Is I'm blowing it up from the dot up to 120%, and then I'm moving it back down. That kind of gives it a little pulse effect. And then I can control the timing with CA keyframe animation. So for 70% of the time, it's like growing, and then for 30% of the time, it's shrinking back. And can even control, like, I guess, how it gets from one point to the other. So I'm kind of doing an ease in and then doing an ease out. And then for duration, I guess when I'm doing like a multi-part animation, I like to try to keep it like a fraction of, I guess, a master kind of duration. And that way, like, if I want to slow the animation down, I can just do that from one point. So actually, I should show that off right now. So I have my master duration at 0.8 seconds. So let's change that to 4.8. You can kind of see a little bit what's going on. There we go. You can see it's mostly slow, except for the fact that the confetti is blowing out a bit fast. And that's, I'll get into that a bit later. That's the CA emitter layer. It's a bit harder to control. So let's see. OK, so that's now getting to the circle animation. So that's actually kind of a 2-part thing, is that we'll have a ring kind of expanding, and then 50% of the way through, I want to fade it out. That gives it a nice effect. So there's actually 2 parts of it, and they're both CA basic animations. So I'm going from, in this one, I'm just doing the transform, so I'm growing it. And so it's going from 0 to 200%. And that's my duration, and I just want it to ease out, so it kind of slowly grows out. And then the fade is kind of just, I want that to start 50% of the way through of the growing animation. And begin time is how you kind of define a delay for it. And then kind of to make it easier to deal with, use something called CA animation group. So you can kind of like bundle your animations together, and then kind of, I just want this, all of this to apply to the circle. And so that's what I'm doing right here. So you can see that they're kind of bundled up. And so like later on, when I actually add the animation to the layer, I can just define the group. And said, hey, just add this whole group to the layer. Cool. And then finally, there's the CA emitter layer. So this is kind of a cool thing where I think it's part of core animation, and you kind of just can generate particles. And so I have it in this nice function called create explosion. And so it's kind of you have a CA emitter layer, and that's kind of what you use to generate particles. But in order to actually generate the particles, you need a CA emitter cell. And so I'm creating 3 cells, each of different, 4 cells actually, of different colors. And I'm having them, that's the little confetti that you see popping out. So then the emitter cells is actually a little bit to configure. I'll just go through this really quick. So it's like the CA emitter cells are actually just, you can think of them as just pumping out UI images. They're just spitting out images. So I've defined the image here in the contents of a ball blue. You can see that's what it's spitting out. And they're quite big, so I'm scaling them down to 10% here. The scale range is like, it's randomly generating these, and you can actually randomly change the size of it. So this is saying like, just vary the balls by 10% when they come out. It's pumping out for 0.3 seconds. The emission range is, this is kind of like a cone and where it comes out. So I want it to have like, the emitter is like kind of a point, and I want it to emit all around the point instead of just like a semicircle in front of it. The lifetime is how many seconds that each confetti bit lasts. Alpha speed is the fade, so the balls will fade as they come out, and this is kind of just the rate at which they fade out. Birth rate is how many balls I want each one to spit. Velocity is how fast they're coming out. Velocity range is also, so it's like goes between 120 to 230 of, I actually don't know what velocity is. Pixels per second? I don't know. Oh, points, yes. Y acceleration is gravity, basically. And scale speed, they can scale slightly as they're coming out, so they shrink very slightly. And then the begin time. So this is kind of a delay on how before they start spitting out. So you can see like if I had like a duration, master duration of like 4.8 seconds, like I'd have to do all sorts of maths to say, oh, the velocity should go a little bit slower according to that. That was just too much math, so sorry I didn't do that.
We'll show live.
Yeah. Oh, and then finally, when we have all that stuff, yep, just using, so I lied a little bit. Instead of a UI view animate, so I'm using the new UI view property animator, which basically works the same. And that's to just mess with the image view. So you'll see that when the heart kind of, oh, come on. The heart outline is actually an image. And so it kind of grows and then shrinks. And then that's kind of what this is controlling the, that UI view property animator. And then finally, just to kind of make it easier to like control everything, there's this thing called CA transaction. So I just say, hey, begin, and then I add all the animations, and then CA transaction commit says, hey, just do all the animations. And then it also has this nice thing where you can set a completion block on the animations. Normally for CA animation, like you have to, in order to figure out when your animations are actually finished, there's like a delegate callback. But if you want to be really lazy, you can just do CA transaction, set completion block. And that's where I do all my cleanup and stuff. So I remove all the layers and set everything back to normal. Yeah, so that's how we do the favorites animation. So let's have a look at it in action in the app. So yeah, as you can see, we put it on table saws right here. So this is our search results page. And you can view all the different t-shirts that are mashups. And Israel's just favoring all the things.
That's it.
Yep.
Last little bit.
Yep. So we'll just go back. Yeah. Cool. Any questions? Ashley.
I've got two questions, sorry. First, did you actually come up with the values and prototype the whole thing next in code in the playground, or did you do it, or did you prepare the playground just to show us? And also, how did you come up with the values?
To be honest, when I first started, I think someone had actually made something similar to like the Twitter favorite and stuff. So I just grabbed that, and then I just started playing with all of the values to try to make it what I wanted. Obviously, theirs is a little bit different. Like they didn't use CA and middle layer. So that one, there was actually an Apple has a sample Mac app, which shoots all sorts of fancy fireworks, and just played around with that until I got the look that I wanted with it. The playground, yeah. Actually, I was developed initially on the playground. I probably got about 90% of the animation in the playground, just because it was really easy to, I could just change the value and I wouldn't have to like start and stop the simulator. It would just run right there in the playground. So that was really nice. And then the last 10%, I did it in the app. But then for this presentation, I have to admit that, yeah, I did port it back to the playground. But yeah, it was actually really helpful to develop the animation in the playground, just because it was super easy to just change the number and see the change appear on the screen.
Just wondering why, obviously a fair bit of code there, not just using something like Lottie. I mean, obviously you've done a bit of the work already in After Effects and things like that. So why not just use frameworks like that?
I guess you had a little bit of
Yeah, so I've had some extensive experience with Lottie. It does okay with like some path tracing stuff, but it's also pretty good for, let's say, you want to do an onboarding screen and you show a canned animation. It kind of falls apart when you repeat UI elements over and over, especially on older spec devices. As well, I'm really reticent to using a framework which may rapidly accumulate tech debt. rather than using out-of-the-box solutions if we can. And another nice thing was sitting with Gerald and designing with him, especially with the Sketch Playground. Lottie puts a lot of pressure on me to find the weird esoteric workarounds for things that don't export perfectly from After Effects. And actually the After Effects comp looked great in After Effects with motion blur on. And when I put in Lottie, there were some weird alias bits and it didn't translate great. We also wanted a bit of dynamic behavior to the animation, so it wasn't the exact same thing over and over and over, especially if you're favoriting the same thing. There was some idea that we would vary the particle direction or something. We ended up playing around with it, and it didn't really work out the way we thought it would, but basically, for all those reasons, I didn't use that framework in this case. If I was going to do a complex sort of onboarding or illustration-based animation, I would still consider Lottie for that, but it kind of falls apart, especially on older devices.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry, I would just say one last thing. I need to talk a little bit more crap about Lottie. It does not generate very pretty things code-wise, so if, let's say, Gerald were to quit and I had somebody else come on board, they might not know exactly what they were looking at. So it makes it really hard to modify it later, like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow. That's it.
Also, we have a bunch of Redbubble swag, like stickers and pens and screen cleaners, if anyone's interested.
Thank you, guys. That was really great. I took a photo of your laptop with the CocoaHeads sticker on it as well. That's great.
It's alright on here. It's alright on here. No, because the inset. So this is what's projected. This is the camera inset. This is the top of the playground. Yep. I wouldn't know how to use it anyway. We put it at the bottom.
Maestro.
Because it's got a lot of apps, right? There's a lot of other things happening. Just put it in your pocket.
All right. Hi, I'm Pablo Caif. I'm a senior engineer working at iFlix with a couple of guys here. Yeah, Adrian and Ben as well. And I'm here to talk to you about my adventures and disadventures with Core Bluetooth. So first, I'm just going to give you just a brief pass about Bluetooth Low Energy. So Bluetooth Low Energy is actually like an evolution of the classic Bluetooth. It came out, I think, version 4 of Bluetooth. And it had a few objectives. The first one was try to reduce the power consumption, which make it really good for IoT stuff because you have very small devices, which just very limited battery life. So it's ideal for that. And it also, you can also have a set of different protocols that you can implement on top of it, which formalizes like the whole thing. And a good thing, different, I think, to what classic Bluetooth is that pairing is optional. So you can actually, the different devices around can be advertising stuff, and you can easily just discover it without having to pair formally to them. Unless, of course, you want to use security. So when you want to use security, then in that case, you actually need to pair. And it supports AS128 and I think AS256. So, yeah. So I was telling you that it has these layers, these multiple protocols, and you can actually define layers. It's kind of like what you do with TCP/IP. So what we got is on the bottom, we got the actual Bluetooth controller, which is talking to the device. On top of that, we can add L2 cap, which is the link control protocol. And that's something quite similar to what you would see like TCP, right? So you send streams of bytes, and you get streams of bytes. It has like a header and CRC, because you can have situations like device can be moving away, you can start having errors around on the packages. On top of that, we got the attribute layer, the attribute protocol, which allows you to, it basically defines operations such as write services, so write characteristic or write pieces of data, or read or subscribe. And on top of that, we got the GATT, which is the generic attribute protocol, which defines like a set of formal ways of communicating with devices through services and characteristics. This is pretty cool because you have like a very well-known set of identifiers, for example, for a heartbeat monitor, that if you want to do an app for that, and that heartbeat monitor actually implements the standard, you can just discover the services and start reading its data. And on top of that, you got your app. So L2 cap. So L2 cap is more like a transporter, maybe not as fast. Few things can go wrong, so you need to be very careful. Maybe not as bad as it can go if you end up with all your particles scattered in space. But one of the cool things it has is slow overhead. So all the information you normally have if you were using the attribute protocols or the GATT is that there's a lot of bits that go into the package definition that in this case they're not there. And it's ideal to send a bit larger pieces of information because you can put more bytes into it. But when I'm saying largest pieces of information, I'm actually talking about megabytes, not gigabytes or anything like that. just to give you an idea of the scale. And it's also great for streaming, because you just, as I was saying before, send bytes and receive bytes. But for all the rest of the stuff, it's much easier to use GUT. GUT is more like a shell graph. You send smaller payloads. It's a bit safer. There's a lot of stuff around you already predefined that helps you a lot. It defines multiple profiles, which means that, for example, there are specific profiles for heartbeat monitors or sensors or stuff like that. And it's very easy to get started. There are a whole set of libraries in all different platforms which allow you pretty easily to discover these services and characteristics that I was telling you. And the way the whole thing is modeled is into a central, which is the part that wants the data, and the peripheral, which is the part that has the data. So in this case, your peripheral would be heartbeat monitor. So to get a little bit more into detail, say I have my own peripheral heartbeat monitor. This heartbeat monitor can be advertising different services. So for example, one of the services could be the heartbeat. Another one could be battery level. And each service can have multiple characteristics. For example, in the battery case, we could have the battery level itself, the charge, the percentage. And we could have maybe, I don't know, how wear off is the battery. And we could decide to throw down the device. No, maybe that's not a good idea. And then we have the values and descriptors. So the descriptors will tell us what that characteristic has, or what sort of types you have. For example, if it's a string or if it is a float. And the value itself is what you are interested to read, what you want to actually read or write. So Core Bluetooth is the Apple implementation of it's the library, the framework that allows you to access to Bluetooth LE. And the way it has been defined is that it models all this communication that I was telling you between the peripheral and central, and all the GUT sort of a paradigm where you have services, characteristics, and a very cool thing, different than classic Bluetooth, is you don't need to be in the MFI program. So you can just connect to any device that is advertising services and start reading stuff. It supports state restoration, which is pretty cool. That means that, for example, if you are, I don't know, doing a firmware update, and for some reason your app gets terminated in the background, iOS will actually keep that connection alive and will keep trying to receive or send the bytes, and you will get like a callback. Your app will get started, and then you can actually start restoring the state and reconnecting and getting everything back together. And as of iOS 11, they are guaranteeing the latency as low as 15 milliseconds only on the iPhone, on the latest iPhones, and on the Mac, and I think on the latest iPads, the iPads Pro. But on the rest of the stuff, such as the Apple TV and the Apple Watch, I think it's 30 milliseconds. It also, as of iOS 11, they started supporting L2CAP, which is pretty cool because you can actually do streaming. The way the whole communication is implemented is through delegates and async APIs. So you do a call, you assign a delegate, and then you get a callback on the delegate. So to get a little bit more into details, my green boxes are the CB Central Manager. So this is, for example, you have on your mobile phone, you want to read heartbeats, right? So you instantiate the CB Central Manager. It goes and assign the delegate, the CB Central Manager delegate, powers off the hardware, and you eventually get a state change callback, which it will tell you that whether the hardware is on or if it's not available. Then you can start scanning for peripherals, and then you get a callback telling you that it has discovered peripherals. So what it will do, it will start coalescing the packages. Each peripheral sends packages telling you what's their ID and the signal and stuff like that. So it will coalesce and just send you to a callback every time it discovers a peripheral. Then you can connect to the peripheral, and you get a callback telling you that you have connected to a peripheral, and then you need to implement or adopt the CB peripheral delegate. And you also need to use the peripheral that you got in your initial, the one you're actually trying to connect. So when you do that, you can start discovering for services. Eventually, then you can try to get the characteristics. And then you can actually write. So it's like a lengthy process. And along the way, you actually need to start saving stuff. So for example, if you're interested in reading or writing a specific characteristic, you actually need to assign it to a variable. And you can also read. And you get callbacks for that. And the cool thing is you can also listen for notifications. So you can subscribe to a characteristic that changes frequently, and you can just, you will get a callback, read a characteristic read value every time any value has arrived. So I'm going to give you a demo. So what I've been working on, it's I'm working on an app that connects to an actual hardware, but I can't really talk much about the actual app, so I built like a similar example. So I imagine myself that I'm working on a nuclear plant, and I need a Geiger meter to try to stay myself safe from nuclear waste. So what I did is I built like a very simple and rudimentary Mac app. Which sets itself as a peripheral and starts advertising a few custom services. So that's my app there. And if I start a service, I can actually use an app. This will be just like this is an app that I used also to actually do the development because it's easier to see the services and characteristics being advertised. So, should be able to see my computer. Y-Flix, that's it. Okay, looks like there's a lot of yep. And you can see there, I don't know if you're able to read from there, but I got my Geiger counter, which I can listen for notifications, and you can see on my peripheral that it has discovered that someone has subscribed to that. And I can, for example, send commands through this one. This is an actual write characteristic. And I can get the battery. This is like a custom battery service. I could have implemented the actual standard one, but it will overlap with the Mac. So you can see the battery level. What I'm doing is I'm just generating random numbers. So it's just gonna, every time I read it, it's just gonna give me a random number. So then I went and built an actual iOS app that it will set itself as an actual peripheral. Sorry, as a central. So we'll try to access to that peripheral, virtual peripheral defining here. So if I run it on my phone, and hopefully I can connect. So what this one will do, it will connect to that service, that gigameter service that I was showing to you, and it will subscribe to one of the characteristics that is giving me the radiation readings. And it will also show me the battery and stuff like that. So as soon as I connect, you can see how I'm sending about every 400 milliseconds a new value. So this one is getting the notifications. And you can see there on the top, the battery is changing 20%, 39%. And you can see on the actual server, so sort of my peripheral side, how it's actually generating the new values. And I can send a command, this is the right part, to sort of stop, stand by, or I can set another command to get it going and continue. Yeah, so that's it.
You're telling the Bluetooth device to start and stop sending?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I thought it wouldn't really make much sense going through all the codes. I'm gonna put it in GitHub if you're curious. But going back to the presentation, there were a few learnings that I had with all my experience, my adventures. So first thing that I easily missed, that seems obvious at this point, is you need to save the peripheral when you want. As soon as you get it and you want to connect to it, you need to save it to a variable because, of course, it's going to get released. And even if you say connect, it's just going to disappear and it's not going to connect. I was having some problems with the hardware. The hardware was sending, we weren't getting the packages as quick as we wanted. And something that if you are working, someone building the hardware, it's always a good idea to ask them to send a negotiation or ask your actual device to negotiate a shorter connection time. That's the part that I was telling you before. For example, 15 milliseconds. You can actually, on iOS, on the core Bluetooth, it's very easy to do. You can tell, as soon as you connect to a central, you can tell it, set the connection time to low. So I will try to go to the lowest one. But if not, of course, because it wants to save battery, it will try to negotiate a higher one. The state restoration is pretty tricky. It's not easy to implement because you actually need to get to the state you were before the app was terminated. This is, again, when the app gets terminated and you get new data coming, your app gets started again, and then you do the app did finish launching, and then you need to reinstantiate your peripheral delegate, your CV Central peripheral, CV Central manager, and then you get like callbacks, and you need to rebuild your whole state, which is pretty tricky. It's always a good idea to implement the delegates handle errors, like all the methods that tells you there was an error, whether when you were trying to connect or when you were trying to read something, because it will tell you interesting stuff. So a lot of times when you can get things working, get a lot of information from there. Another one very interesting that I run into is when you define a characteristic, for example, the battery level, if you create it and set an initial value, when you try to update it, it will just ignore every time you try to change the value. So you need to set it initially as nil. And the security and pairing can be tricky as well. I managed to get it working with the hardware that I was working with, and also between two iOS devices, but for some reason I couldn't manage to get it working between the Mac and the iOS device. And there are always good things to do, like best practices. The first one is the battery is always a precious thing in your user's device. So don't just scan the whole time. Scan as soon as you get whatever you're interested in, stop scanning, because that will reduce quite a lot of the power consumption. Actually, to reduce even more the power consumption when you're actually doing the scanning, you can say which services, you can specify which services you're interested in. So you can just give a list of services. And instead of, if you, in my case, as you were seeing my readings of radiation readings, it's always a good idea to subscribe rather than pull for new values. Another cool one is iOS has a nice cache of connections. So if I ever connected to a device, it will have an internal cache, so you can actually do a call to get all the previously known peripherals that you once connected to. And then you can try to reconnect to that one. And you can also get the already connected peripherals. Remember that you could be reinstantiating and could be something already connected. And that will save you the first step, the scan. You might not need to scan. Then if you can't really connect to the peripheral, then you can start scanning. Leverage all what GATT provides you, using services, advertising stuff as services and characteristics. If you're using like a predefined standard, it's always a great idea to go and read the GATT database and find what you're interested in. If you're defining your own services and characteristics, you can always generate your own UUIDs for those services and characteristics. And once you read and you got all the stuff you need, don't forget to disconnect. And the last one, sorry. The last one is write a simulator. For me, it was very good because I didn't have the hardware with me all the time. So that's why I wrote the bit on the Mac, which ended up being very useful. So a few places where you can find more information. The Apple Bluetooth guide and docs are always really good to get more information. There is also the actual GATT specification that I was telling you. There are 2 sessions, 2013 703 WWDC sessions and 2017 last year. They also have a very good information. The 2 apps that I was showing, one of them that I was showing to you before is called Light Blue app, and there is another one, NRF Connect. And they're really good for these initial states when you want to check that the hardware is actually advertising itself properly with the right numbers and right IDs and stuff like that, and is publishing the right services. And that's the link to my 2 projects, the Mac one and the iOS one. So that's it. Any questions?
Is what you haven't shown us, has that got anything to do with radiation?
So you're saying if there is actually radiation being emitted here? Yeah. Now, what I'm doing is nothing to do with that. I was just trying to come up with something that it sends packages very frequently. And I was also trying to play with the core animation, same thing that Gerald was doing, so I was trying to get the needle moving. Yeah. Yes?
I couldn't encode the first symbol on your show.
That's an I.
A?
I. That's a, yeah, square root of -1. That's I.
Any more questions, guys? Thank you, Noah.
All right, thank you.